Football season is in full swing for youth, high school, and college players in Brevard. Some of those players are bound to suffer concussions. The long-term effects of multiple concussions have made news as NFL players publicize their symptoms, but we're beginning to see some progress in treating and mitigating them, including new low-cost testing that can help with diagnosis and with preventing worse brain injury. That's where today's guest comes in. Angie Taylor is a professional therapist with Speech Path of Brevard. She had specialized in rehabbing people who have suffered strokes, brain injuries, and childhood speech issues. Recently, she began offering baseline testing for young players in all manner of activities, including football, lacrosse, women's soccer, and cheerleading. The test cost just $25, making them affordable to most families. I asked Taylor to explain. Angie, let's start with this basic question here because I think it's important, is what is a concussion?
Well, a concussion, I think there's a big misconception out there. People think a concussion is when you are knocked out cold, unconscious, which certainly is a severe form of it. There are also mild forms of it. So basically, it's just any blow to the head that creates any kind of trauma. It truly is a traumatic brain injury, and people don't like to think of it that way, but it's any blow to the head that disrupts cognitive functioning, basically. So,
is it like bruising, or is it something inside where your synapses get knocked apart and that kind of thing? I mean,
yeah, it just depends on how severe the blow is. You know, it could be that the brain is just jostled around a little bit, all the way to the extreme where, you know, we have axonal shearing, where the brain, the neurons are actually just ripped apart, and you know, could cause lots of problems there. Sometimes it's not even the initial blow. It's the second concussion syndrome is the big deal, is that you could have a somewhat mild concussion, but if an athlete is still symptomatic and then there's another blow on top of that, it can start a catastrophic chain of events. So, you know, basically a concussion injures the brain. So, you know, if an athlete were to sprain his ankle, you know, typically we would have them sit out, rest it up, you know, give it some time. Same thing, the brain needs a little rest. So during that time, if the brain doesn't get sufficient rest and then they go out and there's another blow on top of that, it may not even be that significant. It can cause brain bleeds, hemorrhage, you know, pressure on the brain, emergency surgeries, you know. There's kids that have to learn how to walk and talk, and some that could pass away.
Wow.
You know, and that's on the extreme side. You know, I'm trying to prevent that.
Even just preventing the kind of brain injury that could lead to long-term problems,
right.
Or, you know, God knows what could happen in terms of functioning in school and that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Now, what kind of athletes are getting concussions now? I mean, everybody thinks about football, of course.
Right.
But that's not the only sport, right?
Right. Football's a leading one, but number two, believe it or not, is girls soccer.
Really?
Yes. And I think a lot of it is that, you know, girls have kind of, you know, we're new age. We want to be as tough as boys, and so the girls suck it up and they don't want to complain, and they get out there and they do their thing. So they don't complain quite as much as the boys, and have sometimes longer lasting symptoms because of it.
So is it cracking their heads when they're going up for a header, you know, or is it they fall and they whip their head against the ground? I mean, is there a kind of thing that typically will is a bigger risk?
Well, certainly, if the head is involved, it is a bigger deal. But we are finding, and a lot of the research is indicating, even just the jostling of the body movements, you know, just the head getting whipped forward, you know, say in football, and someone tackles you from the side, doesn't even hit the head, but, you know, is sufficient force to, you know, whip the head around a little bit. Same thing with soccer or lacrosse or any of those. It could be just the bumping of bodies.
I think I saw a study in preparing for this interview. I think it was George Mason University studied concussion trends for like 150,000 students. And sure enough, they found over 11 years that boys sports accounted for about 75% of the concussions. Football with more than half of them, given the sheer number of people involved in this contact sport.
Right.
But girls soccer was number 3 overall,
Right.
up there with boys lacrosse and football for concussions. Cheerleading.
Yes.
Are you seeing cheerleaders that get concussions?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that I was a cheerleader, you know, and I see the things that they're doing now, and I'm like, wow. Certainly there's a high risk, you know, because they're throwing them up. There's much more athletic ability there,
Right.
and they're tumbling.
Falling from 30 feet, potentially.
Right, absolutely.
I gotcha. What are the symptoms of a concussion? If I've got somebody who comes home from football practice or soccer practice, they're not feeling right, what do I look for?
Well, there's kind of 4 different domains that we kind of look at. You know, there's their physical symptoms, you know, if they're having a headache or blurred vision or anything over like that, that's going to be a big one. Their emotional mood, if they're suddenly very irritable or emotional, or, you know, they get mad over the simplest little thing, you know, that could be a red flag. Their sleep patterns, increased sleep or decreased. Sometimes with a concussion that's lasting a while, they sometimes have trouble falling asleep. Or they may fall asleep and they're waking up frequently at night, is another one. And the last one, emotional, physical.
Well, here's a question for you while you think about it. I remember when I was in high school, we had all these old wives' tales kinds of things. If you get a concussion, are you supposed to stay awake? Or can you go to sleep?
Well, they do suggest that you monitor very closely for a while. Certainly you want to be examined by a physician and, you know, go to the ER if it was a significant concussion. I think the bigger deal now is the brain rest after the event.
Okay.
So certainly during those immediate hours, you know, they do say, but it is my understanding at least that it is okay to go to sleep. But you want to
I would think that rest would be good, right?
Right.
I mean,
right.
Okay, because I think the fear was if you go to sleep, you might die and not wake up, like it was some kind of a crazy dream scenario. Mm-hmm. Okay, so full disclosure for our audience, your company offers a new kind of testing.
Yes.
And you're not the only one that does, but I just wanted to disclose that to folks. It's baseline testing, and I know this goes on at the college level and at the pro level now.
Right.
Relatively new. Mm-hmm. What is it? Tell me what it is.
This is neurocognitive baseline testing. So basically what it does is it's going to establish a baseline for every athlete. And it also factors in, you know, these kids that have learning disabilities. You know, we all have different cognitive abilities. So it establishes their baseline, and it gives an objective number. It looks at their visual and verbal memory, their processing speed, their reaction time, those kinds of things. So then later on, if there is an event of any sort and you're a little bit concerned, you can retest them. And it will calculate a cognitive efficiency index, and it measures their symptoms as well. So that's another nice feature, is that, you know, we want kids or adults to be symptom-free before they return to play. And that's the biggest risk factor, is if someone is still experiencing symptoms and they return to play, they're at risk.
So it's almost like a 4-dimensional vision test where they get all these different kinds of sorts of measures. So then what? So we have this baseline on file, and then if they get hurt, they come back and they take the test again, and then you compare where they are on
Right. It's all computerized. They, you know, have the formulas that they figure all that out. I just pretty much administer the test, generate the report, and a physician would review it. I don't make any decisions regarding return to play, or I don't give any suggestions. This is just a service that I felt strongly about in protecting my own kids. So.
Well, so again, you're not a ninny,
right?
Right. You're not saying that kids are, you know, I need to stay away from the. Tell me about that. You got kids that play football?
Yes. Big sports family. We play football, baseball, basketball, you name it. My husband coaches everything, so we're a very busy family. The thing that really just was overwhelmingly shocking to me, and, you know, we were talking about this earlier, you know, it was so cute when they're little pee-wee players and they've got their helmets and their bobbleheads. I guess it was 2 years ago, I was at the 2012 Brain Injury Symposium in Miami. Dr. Robert Cantu was speaking, and he's written a book, Concussion in Our Kids. He proceeded to list a series of symptoms that could go on for a prolonged time with children. and that would be, putting these children at risk. And I was sitting there just mortified that right before I left for this conference, my son was struggling in school. He was coming home every day taking a nap. He had headaches, and I just chalked it up that he was being lazy. I was like, come on,
or it's heat, or
right,
it's fatigue, yeah.
Right, and so once I started kind of connecting the dots, I'm like, wow, he had had a significant blow the week prior, and we were concerned. Went and had him checked out. Everything was fine. But at that time I didn't know how crucial brain rest was, and nobody told me. So, he continued to practice that week, and my husband is the coach, so he was very mindful and careful. But I was just shocked to hear that, those repeated blows, particularly when they're symptomatic, is very frightening. And then you start hearing more and more in the news with the long-term effects. So I just wanted to do anything I could to protect my boys. So on one of our breaks, I went to him and I said, what is a safe age for kids to play football? And he said, never.
Really?
And I was like, wow. And then he said, okay. He said, well, his recommendation is 14. My oldest is now 14, but at the time they were both younger than that age. So, I was like, well, what else can I do? And he recommended the baseline measure, and that's where I learned about this test.
So that if you go and you do it, you've at least got some way to assure yourself and your family that they're going to be able to recover and not have that concussion upon concussion.
Right.
Exacerbation of injury without,
right.
At least having some
I didn't want to be the helicopter mom that's running out there and freaking out. I just wanted an objective measure that, would tell us whether or not they were okay to play. And I don't want to be the bad guy.
Right.
Because they want to play. And so, and that's the other thing that I like about this test. Kids want to play. So on the sidelines, when the coach says, are you okay? Yeah, coach, I'm good, I'm fine. But when he gets home and mom and dad notice that he's moving a little bit slower, or, he's sleeping more, or he's a little bit moody, then they could say, hey, I think something else is going on, and come back in to be tested again. And so it just gives us another way to assess the kids and make the decisions that they can't make for themselves.
Now, is there a set amount of time or a recommended amount of time that somebody should, I guess the whole point of the baseline is you're doing away with this idea of take 2 weeks and rest and then come back. It's more just take as long as it takes to get back to normal functioning.
Right.
Is that correct?
Absolutely. And that was what I worked with patients with traumatic brain injuries in a hospital setting. I knew how important brain rest was, but I never thought of, a concussion or even just a jostling on the football field is requiring brain rest. And so I was surprised to see how delicate the pediatric brain is. These are little brains that are still growing and developing. And the last time I checked, we're not doing brain transplants. So I figured we better protect what brains they have. And, seeing the long-term effects with some of these football players, it just really had me concerned.
Talk about that a little bit. The news has been full of NFL players who went through this major lawsuit and everything about brain damage. These are older players who are developing these symptoms later on in life. You work with a number of seniors all the time on things like, what are some of the things that you do with seniors? Swallowing, motor skills, speech, those kinds of things. Have you seen people come in that maybe are symptomatic of stuff that happened to them with concussions earlier in life?
Well, interestingly enough, I used to work in a nursing home, and I had an ex-Notre Dame football player on my caseload, and he was a pharmacist, a retired pharmacist. So you think about the level of cognitive ability, number one, to go to Notre Dame, number two, to become a pharmacist and to have a successful career, but he did retire early, and he was starting to struggle. And then to see him, he was by this point, getting near the final stages, and to just think of this brilliant individual, now having trouble with day-to-day activities. I was working with him on, just getting up and sticking with the routine and going and taking a shower and those kinds of things. But
and did he believe that his issues were related to football or injury some way, or is it just did it always just stand out there as something that you suspected?
By that point, he really didn't think he had a problem. So
Oh, okay.
you know, so it gets to that point where it's beyond that, you know. And a lot of these studies, they don't even determine for sure that it is related to the chronic traumatic encephalopathy and postmortem, you know. So unless somebody goes in and donates their body to science, then that's when they would see it, right, and really see.
Well, so baseline testing is one of the new things. Definitely could help mitigate potential long-term damage.
Right.
But there's also been a number of changes to helmets and equipment and that kind of thing. What do you make of that?
Well, you know, I think they're all great. I mean, I think that collectively, I'm glad that there's so many industries out there that want to protect kids and that everybody is a little bit concerned about it. I just think it sometimes gives us a false sense of security. I talked about the fact that, you know, we have the skull as the hard outer shell, but we put these fancy helmets on top of it, and there's a couple things. For the younger kids, they don't even have the neck muscles to support the helmet. So we're then sending them out on the field, and they don't really even have good head control. So that's a problem for the younger ones. For the older ones, yes, they are better. They are protecting, you know, some of the new technology we were talking about from the University of Florida is helping to deflect some of the impact of those blows. But still, if the brain is moved within the skull, there could potentially be a problem.
It's rattling around.
Right. And it could not even, sometimes it's very subtle, you know, or it could be that they had a serious blow that week during practice, and then during the game it was just a very simple little hit that could cause the problem.
I think I saw a study recently that said that at altitude, players in Colorado get less concussions than people at sea level because that brain tends to swell up just a tad at altitude and it jiggles around less in there.
Yes, yes. That would be interesting.
Well, you said something a minute ago that I just wanted to come back on, and the author, the researcher who said, you asked him what about the age, and he said 14.
Yes.
Why younger than 14, no, and higher than 14,
well,
yes?
It kind of goes back to that, right. It goes back to the physical development of the kids, that they would have sufficient neck muscles to support the head, that cognitively they understand the proper technique to tackle, you know, then they're not going to lead in head first and, you know, do some of these things that these little guys get out there and are just crazy, you know, like Friday night tykes or whatever. So I think that was just an arbitrary number he came up with, ideally waiting until they're in high school. But in my family, I just knew that wasn't going to happen.
Right.
You know, interestingly enough, though, you're talking about studies. I think it was the University of Rochester. I could be wrong on that. Did a study of 25 college-age players that had no history of concussion. And they found their hippocampus, the part of the brain that is involved in memory, was significantly smaller than non-athletic individuals. So I just thought that was kind of interesting.
What does that mean? What does the hippocampus do?
Well, that's the center. It's involved with memory and recall. So just over time. And then there was another study.
Oh no!
Same
so
thing
he's confirming the stereotype of the dumb jock, right? You know, with maybe.
Yeah.
No, okay.
I don't know.
Maybe that's a leap.
I'm sure there's probably another study to refute that one, but there's just, you know, lots of concern out there. There was another one that showed some differences in the white matter of the brain, which is involved with cognitive processing and stuff. So
I just wonder if, you know, I think you have a healthy attitude about this because I think the numbers of concussions in football probably are related to the number of people who play football.
Right.
And if we suddenly said, don't play football, go play soccer, we'd probably see a tremendous number of concussions in soccer.
Right.
You know, although there's no question that that football is a rough and tumble sport. I loved this one. I saw in the Journal of Neurosurgery, they did confirm that modern helmets do make a difference. They went back and drop tested with velocity, some kind of equipment, the old-fashioned leather helmet versus a modern helmet, and found that, I mean, there was no comparison. That those poor people back in
yeah.
the old Leatherhead days were absolutely, risking their lives,
Right,
to be out there doing that.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit, if I wanted to get my student in to have a baseline test, what's the procedure for doing that? Do I need to go to my doctor and ask for it, or do I go to...
No, insurance doesn't cover it. You don't even need a doctor's prescription or anything. You would just call up, come in, and we do the test. It's on file. Then, if anything happens and you have another hit, or even if you're just concerned, we can do a follow-up post-baseline testing. There's also a new app out I just found out today. It's called the Passport. So once you do the baseline testing, you have a customer ID, and so it's stored in your phone.
Really?
And let's say you're at the game on a Friday night and something happens, and God forbid you have to go to the ER, you're able to access this and you have access to your report immediately for the ER physician or for yourself or whatever, to kind of track those symptoms.
I can see kids storing those on their huddle program
Yes,
someday, but that would have to be behind the wall. Tell me a little bit more about what you do for others, not just football players, but what you do at Speech Path in terms of if somebody is hurt, somebody does have a brain injury. What kinds of techniques and services are you doing there?
Well, immediately after a traumatic brain injury, it is the rest. That is the most critical thing, to just allow the brain time to heal. After that, we would work on what we call compensatory strategies, little techniques to help aid them in returning to their full potential. Sometimes it's even just as simple as keeping up with a calendar, making a to-do list. I think some of those things as we age,
right,
that we end up having to, it's hard to keep up with so many different things. So teaching them technology to help with recalling, day-to-day activities. And then we can slowly do some structured activities, recalling numbers, giving them a series of digits and seeing if they can recall the digits, and then increasing the length of those digits. Word recall, visual recall, just looking at different patterns.
What other ways do people get concussions? I mean, car accidents or?
Yeah, car accidents. You could fall. I mean, trip and fall, in your front yard. I've heard of all kinds of crazy things working at the hospital. You would, just a variety, anything that could end up causing a bump on the brain,
Car accidents are an everyday occurrence. I mean, are there other? I mean, how often do you see people that need some kind of therapy from just a bad head blow on our highways or on our roads, that kind of thing?
Right. We don't get a whole lot of those. I think what happens is they go, especially if it ends up that they're in the hospital, they're going to get some therapy there. A lot of times they will get then referred to outpatient rehab associated with the hospital. So every once in a while through word of mouth we'll get one that will kind of trickle in. But primarily it's just...
Yeah. So have you had athletes coming in and getting their baseline tests?
I have. I mentioned to you I have both of my boys had to take it.
Okay.
And I had my husband.
They were the guinea pigs.
Yes. And lo and behold, it was my husband that needed the follow-up test. He was warming up some baseball players, not really paying attention to the little L screen thing to protect himself. And a kid and he saw the ball coming, and he tried to get out, but he had a blunt force to the face. And we took him to the ER just to get everything checked out. And I was more curious than anything to see if there was going to be a difference, because the next day he said, I am really slow. He said, I was giving him instructions multiple times, and I'm like, are you just really being funny now?
Right.
But, so I had him come back in, and we did do a follow-up.
I would not have thought of that as a classic concussion type of a situation.
Exactly. And it probably, in my mind, wouldn't be classified for most people as a concussion. He didn't lose any consciousness. He didn't have any trouble with recalling the immediate events or what was going on. Everybody runs out on the field and asks, what day is it? Who are we playing?
Mm-hmm.
Those kinds of things. He was fine. He was just kind of stunned. And, as the day went on, I was more concerned that, internally there could have, first he did have a fracture. So,
okay.
you know, it was a significant blow. So I thought, well, we should at least get it checked. So I wanted to do the follow-up test just to see if there really was, I guess, to answer my questions about reliability
Sure.
and validity. And it showed a significant difference in his cognitive efficiency, in his reaction time, his processing speed, and his visual memory.
So you made him stay home until he was cleared?
No, I sent him back to work.
Okay.
He's got to pay the bills, you know.
Okay, well, you can still do that at least,
Yeah.
right? But don't mess around with the baseball
But
until...
certainly with the children, you know, I would have had them stay home.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that was the thing I learned listening to Dr. Cantu is that, you know, here I was, you know, forcing my son to continue to go to school when really what he needed was rest. You know, that would have been the best thing for him. And so in hindsight, you know,
Even
now I
forcing
know.
yourself to do the studying was maybe too much stress.
Right, right.
That's interesting.
So-
We have just a couple minutes left. Any parting thoughts?
No, I just, you know, I guess it's just my mission if there's anything I can do to be a part of a concussion management team.
Right.
I think that that's what it truly takes. It's not going to be the fancy helmet or the sensors or an overprotective coach or parent or whatever. I think it's all of us working together. You know, we need to have physicians on board. You know, I have Dr. Mark Pinsky has been helping me out, and Dr. Dominguez is working. They both are the docs for Vieira High School. But I'd like to get more physicians on board, and I would like to have people that I can refer to. And I'm sure they're out there. I just haven't made those connections. So
It takes a strategy and kind of takes a village to
right.
take
So
care
we're
of
in the
an
early
athlete these days.
processes of networking and getting out there and just getting a good concussion management team. Get these kids back on the field safely.
Let's keep them all safe. Angie
Yeah.
Taylor, thank you so much
All
for
right.
joining us.
Thank you.
Well, that's our program. Thanks for joining us in the Florida Today newsroom. Remember, you can publish your reaction to this show or comment on anything you see or read in Florida Today. Just send an email to me at letters@floridatoday.com or reach me at facebook.com/MattReedNews. I'm Matt Reed. We'll see you next Wednesday right here on WEFS and FloridaToday.com.